There's a bit of water here, so just be careful.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Welcome to the second panel of today's conference, Making Space, Breaking Barriers, Shining Spotlights, Helping Women in Science Succeed. The aim of the second panel is to explore how governments, organizations, and academic institutions are supporting women in scientific careers, and how these efforts are helping to propel women towards greater professional and scientific achievement. And as we learned from the first panel, it is really about institutional frameworks, political frameworks, in order to help come to this culture change, which is needed in order to be able to achieve all of this. My name is Barbara Weidgruber. I'm Director General responsible for scientific research, international relations, and as of last September, also for gender and diversity management in the Austrian Federal Ministry of Education, Science, and Research. In the framework of the European Union, I also have the honor of co-chairing the European Research Area and Innovation Committee on behalf of 27 EU member states. And I will address that later on because that's probably more powerful than the Austrian part of my two hats today. It's an honor and pleasure for me to moderate this panel with the eminent speakers next to me. Dr. Najat Mogda, International Atomic Energy Agency, Amanda Balazzo, IIASA, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and Dr. Aubrey Paris, US Department of State. All of them will introduce themselves before they give their introductory statement in more length. And then, of course, we look forward to having an exchange with all of you and amongst ourselves. As I said, we are responsible for higher education and basic research in our ministry. And what we do in order to provide adequate framework conditions to promote equal opportunities and to strengthen gender equality is actually trying to promote culture change. What we aim for is fixing numbers, meaning the proportion of women in the different parts of their career path. And fixing the knowledge, meaning the integration of gender-related issues in research, innovation, and also in teaching. And of course, fixing the institution, which is also a challenge related to gender equitable structures and processes. And this is what I heard in the first panel, your personal stories and the challenges you faced with your institutions. Decision makers must be made accountable to ensure that the guided development of reflexive knowledge and competencies, as well as the analysis of gender relations and power structures, contribute to dismantling barriers for women in the institutional setting. So our focus is on culture change, and we try to do this with performance agreements with our universities, our research performing organizations, and also our funding agencies. And all of those help, hopefully, promote the culture change. But of course, science and research is only part of society, and one sector will not change all of society, but can have an important contribution. This is part of our research, technology, and innovation strategy, ours meaning the Austrian government, with a focus on knowledge, talents, and skills, and strengthening gender equality and diversity is an integral part of this chapter of our strategy. And I also mentioned my European hat. Linking attractive careers and gender equality is crucial in the European Research Area Policy Agenda 2022 to 2024. And this is based on a Pact for Research and Innovation in Europe, which was adopted in 2021 by the Council of Ministers of the European Union. At that time, Heinz Fassmann was still minister in charge for research in this context. To promote gender equality, to foster inclusiveness, promote attractive and sustainable research careers, balanced talent circulation, international, transdisciplinary, and intersectoral mobility across the European research area are key elements in realizing the European research area. And now we also have a discussion on research assessment, and this is a very important element because if you only focus on highly cited, highly ranked publications as the main denominator for careers and for recruitment, you miss out on all the other missions. So therefore, the discussion now is also to encompass open science, science communication, policy advice, and all the other issues. And this will definitely help us, all of us here, probably know women to have better careers as well. So in Austria, we do have a national action plan to implement the European Research Area Policy Agenda, and this includes a gender equality package of measures with the priorities, structures for further developing and implementing gender equality plans at our institutions. It was mentioned before, this is a prerequisite now also in Horizon Europe and the European Research Council. Developing guidelines concerning the integration of gender dimension in research, innovation, and teaching, and also developing measures to combat gender-based violence and sexual harassment. This issue was mentioned before, but there is also now a study conducted by the European Commission and others giving a clear picture of how great this challenge is in our higher education institutions and research organizations. So we will address this also and have a study now on the Austrian circumstances. And this is a pan-European initiative being led. And we also initiate a cross-sectoral gender equality dialogue because you need all sectors and not just do it in the higher education sector itself or in the research organizations. So with this, I would now like to give the floor to all the other panelists and look forward to your short introductory remarks and maybe also comments already on what we heard, because we have the opportunity to be the second panel and benefit from a lot of interventions before. So Najat, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, and very good morning to all of you, and really very happy to be here with this panel to discuss the women in science and particularly in this session, making an enabling environment for women to be to perform and normal as scientists. And you know, I'm always, when I'm invited to such panel, I always ask myself why we are here, why we are 21st century and we are still discussing this issue. We shouldn't, isn't it? Because women scientists, they have already proven themselves to be good scientists. We have heard this in the first panel. In organizations, we're still trying to ensure the gender balance, 50%. Why is that? Why? You just wonder, what does it take to really, in an organization like mine, the International Atomic Energy Agency, technical UN organization, and nuclear. So even more difficult to attract scientific women. And yet, it takes leadership. That's all, at least at the beginning. And this is what, I mean, when I started in 2001, senior scientist. I came with 2 small kids, 4 years, twins, in an organization where 18% were women. So you can imagine, at that time, alone, in German-speaking country. I don't speak a word of German at that time, and no one from my family. And nobody was here to say, hey, come, what are the issues, where to put your kids, time flexibility. There is none of that at that time. And yet we have to perform. I'm coming from a developing country. I'm Moroccan. I'm Muslim and Arab. I'm coming, and in that environment, even it's international organization, you feel different. You don't speak the language, and you are in Europe, and you still need to perform and prove yourself as senior scientists coming to an organization. So it takes, I must say, courage, determination, and this is what we should maybe mentor to the girls around us and to the women. It takes, because I want to do it and I want to continue. And I have also a husband that he was encouraging me to continue. It takes also an environment and family support. But now I'm the Deputy Director General and I'm heading a department of almost 500 people, where our Director General said, we have to reach the gender equality. I want you to reach 50% by 2025. Because I am Director General, I believe it's possible. And we already reached this in the highest management. We are 6 Deputy Director General, we are 50-50. 3 women, 3 males. Director level, almost there. But we are still looking for the more junior levels. So it takes this leadership, but not only that. It takes also the empowerment of others, of us. We are part of it, and we need to reach it because we should be believing in it. And this is what it takes, because not only the manager telling you reaching 50%, but also as a manager and as a woman and even a man, colleagues, we are believing in it. I'm not sure about the man colleagues, but they have to do it. And we are following that. Now, when we are looking, the problem that we are having and I'm having as a manager is to find these women. Where are they? Sometimes we open the position 3 or 4 times and we don't find, it's not about the qualification, they don't apply. So the Director General and the organization itself, we are putting, steps in place, like Director General has called for what we call Marie Curie Sklodowska Curie program, Marie Sklodowska Curie Fellowship program, where we are giving 100 fellows to young women every year. And now even this year we get more demand. It's become very, very popular, 150 this year. And then he said, well, if these girls, they get their masters, what they're going to do with it, which is true. When even the university girls, they are the first when they're having diploma and they're arriving. Then after the master, how we are going to encourage them to get a job and to apply to the job that we are calling for. And that's why he also set the Lisa Meitner program, where he's inviting these fellows, once they finish this master, to have a training in nuclear facilities all in the world, to really look at opportunities and what they want to do. And we do also mentorship, like what we have heard in the first panel. We did also, we are doing coaching. We are also promoting what we call, women in fusion, women in radiopharmaceutical, women in medical science or in nuclear radiation medicine, all this. But then the question, is it enough? Because I was telling to my colleagues this morning, I have more women coming to me saying, okay, I can't do 100% of my time because I have small kids. I'm asking 20% because I need my small kids. He's just getting to the kindergarten. I need to be there. And another one saying, well, my daughter could not get, still new at the school, a new environment. I need to have 50% on working from home. But this is ad hoc. And we don't have a system in place that say, hey, when you come as a woman, you have kids, those are the opportunities, those are the things that you can do. We don't have that systemic in place that you can choose what you want to do. And I think this is something that we need to work on it. Now, the next issue that I think it's beyond that, it's beyond this organization system that we need to put systems in place to accompany these women. I think it's also societal, the societies. Why only women are asking for this? Why? I'm in a department of 500 women, or 500 scientists, and only women are coming, not men coming asking that I want 50% of my time. Why? Why, when I come as a woman to a country as a scientist, my husband cannot cope and cannot take care of the kids because I'm from a country that does not accept that everybody is asking my husband, what are you doing there alone? And your wife is working. So why, I think here, I'm talking to most of you are Europeans, but think about those women out there, which I'm talking on their behalf, that they want to do exactly what I'm doing, but they cannot because nobody is supporting them. So what the society can do, what the world can do, this is what we should be asking ourselves, is beyond the UN decision and beyond that, I think the mindset, societal shift we need. And I think I'll stop here because I would like to hear the others and the discussion. But as organization, we're doing whatever we can to support these women. But is this enough? That's the question that I'm asking each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, diversity in an international organization is even more challenging than in a national setting. Yeah. And we stay with the international YASA. Amanda, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Palazzo. I'm a researcher at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. I've been here in Austria for almost 11 years now, which is a very long time to start learning and understanding a culture that is very different from my own. I was from the US originally. And I wanted to talk a little bit, I want to thank the organizers for being a part of this. This was something that we've been discussing with the embassies for a while about how to look at women in science and promoting women in science and amplifying the voices of women. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our initiative that we started at IASA, looking at how to amplify the contributions of women and people connected to science. In 2016, we had a visit from the Finnish president, President Halonen, who invited all of the female researchers all together to have a conversation about breaking this glass ceiling, or I like this gorilla glass ceiling. And she was such an inspiration, and she got us talking about things that we had never talked about as a group. We had never had this collection of women together talking about the same issues, and we had been thinking that the challenges that we were facing were a result of our own personal failings or our own personal circumstances or us not being resilient enough. And we realized that it was really the system that was not set up to either protect us or to encourage us or help us to stay active in the community, in academic community. And so we decided that we wanted to build this network of women who are connected to science. And we started the Women in Science Club, and it has been since 2017, early 2017, when we started the club. My vice president, I'm the president, but my vice president, Monica Bauer, is also here. So I would say everything that happens that is good is coming from Monica. Everything that's bad is coming from me. So one of the first things we did was we realized that the issues facing women in academia and in research aren't being faced only by scientists or only by researchers, that there are people in the professional community, people who are connected to the funding. And so we opened it up to all people who are connected to science in some way in their job description. We also understood that there are men who are involved who also want to amplify women's voices and women's contributions. So we've been very open about including men and women as a part of our club members. Right now we have about 70 members, and I would say a third of them are men. And we conduct trainings, social media trainings, media discussions, how to talk with the media, how to do better science writing, how to build better professional promotion materials and things like that. And we also developed a mentoring program. And our mentoring program is, I would say, our crown jewel of the club. We worked very hard on trying to set up a process where you had very clear expectations and very clear guidelines of how to conduct a mentoring relationship. We wanted to make sure that people who were part of the mentoring program were both, as mentors and mentees, were getting something out of the relationship. So we developed a survey to understand what expectations and what people wanted to speak to and offer a mentoring guidance on. And we also made use of our vast alumni in mentoring, because we know that it's a big burden to ask the very few women who are at the top in an organization to take all the responsibility. And so we also opened up to men who are familiar with the institution and also familiar with WISC to be mentors in our program. And I think it's been really quite a success, and people have seen either. What I would say some of our successes is people getting positions outside of EASA sometimes, encouraging them to find a place for themselves in other institutions. But it's a really important thing to promote and also to encourage people to be a part of these kinds of processes. We also, as a club, act as an institutional stakeholder in various activities and institutional changes. So as the institution develops a gender equity plan, or as they develop harassment guidelines or diversity guidelines, we act as a stakeholder and take a look at the documents, offer our comments, and how those documents can be improved, or how the understanding can be improved, or to take a gender focus. And it's been quite nice to be able to offer a way to give to the institution without necessarily saying that this is extra work that we as club members have to develop these plans ourselves. Some of the other ways in which we have helped the institution is by offering a gender perspective on developing things like publication guidelines, which, as we know, as people who are publishing research, that authorship is very important, and women are often either not included as co-authors because their contributions may not necessarily be seen as important as their male colleagues, even if they have contributed as much. Or we know that there is an unconscious bias in the publishing community by first authorships from women, or authorships that don't include women at all. And so this is one of the things that we help to try to improve the situation. The Women in Science Club is also a safe space for people to discuss challenges and to get feedback from people in this kind of peer-to-peer support, where if you're facing a challenge, it's a safe place to talk about that challenge and to get some either language or advice on how to navigate, whether it be sexual harassment or bullying, or looking for promotion. How do you navigate those different levels of bureaucracy, and also find yourself in a situation where you feel that your voice is being heard? Because we know that it's not necessarily just because we are women that we face a certain challenge. It may be that there's this intersectionality of people who are coming from diverse backgrounds, or first generation researchers or scientists, or people who are coming from traditionally underrepresented communities. It becomes very hard to understand if what you're facing is from any one of those different backgrounds. I am very open to talking about data collection and data analysis, as we know that this is something that is very important to actually making a real critical analysis of the scope of the problem. Because if we're not transparent and open about how many women and men are in different positions, or the hiring and promotion of men and women in those positions, we'll never be able to actually understand the extent of the problem. And so this is something that I do in my position at EASA, is actually take a look at this data and see what it tells us as we look at it over historic trends. So I think maybe I can leave it here. I have a lot I can always talk about it. But I'm happy for more questions, so thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Aubrey. Last but not least.
Oh, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Aubrey Paris, and I am the Gender, Climate Change, and Innovation Policy Advisor in the Secretary of State's Office of Global Women's Issues at the U.S. Department of State back in Washington, D.C. And it's really a pleasure to be here today. I couldn't help but notice, listening to especially the first panel discussion, how many really startling and personally impactful personal stories that we heard from our first set of panelists. And there were a few moments in there where we as an audience laughed at certain stories, or, because even if they were startling and maybe even disturbing stories, I couldn't help but notice, because I think sometimes we have that reaction when we can relate to what we've heard. Maybe we're desensitized a bit, unfortunately, to what we've heard. Or sometimes we laugh because it's uncomfortable. And I think that this is a really almost uncomfortable conversation that we're all having here today. And I really want to thank everyone for being willing to have that conversation and discuss and brainstorm based on our personal and professional experiences. So with that being said, as I mentioned, am working with the Department of State, but I'm also really pleased to be here because I am myself a woman scientist. My PhD is in chemistry and material science from Princeton University. And prior to that, I received my undergraduate degree in chemistry and biology from a small liberal arts institution back in the United States called Ursinus College. And I could also relate to some of the stories we heard earlier because I too didn't quite realize what it meant to be a woman in science immediately. I was fortunate and really privileged to have very positive experiences, especially throughout my undergraduate years. And so when I went to grad school at a really renowned institution for a hard science field, I hate that term, that when I got to the department and learned that there was an organization dedicated to women chemists in the department I was in, I was like, why? Why is that necessary? Well, it took barely any looking around to discover I was one of maybe 5 women in a graduate cohort of 35 for my department. All of my peers and my friends and my colleagues, for the most part, were men. And it took me a little bit of time to realize that my authority and my expertise was questioned almost on a daily basis, but it took time to realize that. I remember still the reason, or the turning point, the tipping point for me personally that made me realize that it was personally important for me to pursue gender equity and equality in my work was when I was presenting on behalf of my lab in grad school, and the co-presenters from the other labs, they were all men. And at the end of our section of the presentations, one of my colleagues and friends came up to myself and the other speakers, and he went down the list, and great talk, wonderful presentation, fantastic research, what have you. And then he gets to me and without hesitation looks at me and says, almost accusatorily, "Why are you so good at public speaking?" Excuse me? It wasn't about my research. It was almost an accusation that I had no right to be in that position that I was currently in, and that was my personal tipping point. So I share that story because people ask me all the time how you transition from a PhD in chemistry to a position like I'm in now, where I'm really focused on the nexus of gender issues and climate change. Of course, where science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is so significant. And I tell them that story because it's very important for me to find ways to effectively combine the sciences and more social and interdisciplinary issues, especially based on my personal passions and experiences. So, I am going to give you a few examples today of work happening in the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues at the State Department, as well as in some of our partner offices and bureaus, in order to advance women and girls in science and technology. I'm going to use very climate change specific examples because of my line of work and because it's such an urgent issue to which science and technology can really play an important and enormous role in helping us affect change. It's been very exciting because in the United States, these topics that we're talking about are really big policy priorities at the highest levels of our government. Back in October of 2021, the United States released its first ever national strategy on gender equity and equality, which lays out 10 strategic priorities for our work domestically and internationally to advance gender equity and equality goals. And 2 of those strategic priorities are extremely relevant to today's conversation, one of which is promoting women and girls in STEM, and the other of which is promoting gender equity and mitigating and responding to climate change. And that strategy has led to an enormous amount of policy, diplomacy, and foreign assistance programming work related to the topics we've been discussing today. One other strategy I would be remiss if I did not mention was released in January of this year. It's the United States' first strategy on global women's economic security, which has a great emphasis on women in STEM fields as well. I think that the reason I'm so intrigued by this conversation today is because we are recognizing, especially in the fight against the climate crisis, the incredible opportunity here for women and girls to act as leaders and agents of change in combating the climate crisis among our many other pressing global challenges. And women scientists and technology leaders should be an enormous part of that conversation. But we know that, as was discussed previously, many resources are lacking for women and girls to be able to lead in this space, in the developed world and in the developing world, ranging from the mentorship programs that we've heard great examples of, but unfortunately are still all too uncommon, to financial resources and training resources and many, many others. This is particularly important as we see so many sectors transitioning to more sustainable practices, which is in theory opening up many jobs and many opportunities which women need to have access to. And it's at this point that people look at me sometimes and they're like, duh, why wouldn't they have access? Why wouldn't women and girls have access to these opportunities? And we know, we point to the STEM fields and say we weren't proactive about this before in the broader STEM fields, and so we cannot expect this to just happen if we're not putting forth programs and initiatives to get ahead of the potential challenge here. So one of the initiatives that we've developed in the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues that I'm particularly proud of, which is meant to, I think, tap into some of the buzzwords, the very important buzzwords we've been hearing today, amplifying women's voices, helping them expand their impact, building their networks formally, is an initiative that we have called the Innovation Station Initiative, which is a project where we are identifying women and girl-led solutions to climate-related community challenges around the United States and around the world. So we identify these women and girls doing really incredible works, oftentimes science and technology related, sometimes programmatically. And we are giving them new audiences for sharing their best practices through virtual events and podcasts and newsletters, all the fun public-facing sides. But perhaps more importantly is behind the scenes, where we're helping these women build relationships with new communities around the United States and around the world who could learn from their best practices and develop new collaborations on the ground. We're very proud because this initiative has engaged audiences at this point in 48 US states and territories and 115 countries. And we've helped the women and girls in our network to develop more than 350 new relationships. More than 50% of our initiatives, the women in our network as part of this initiative, have ongoing collaborations that were the direct result of participating in this project. And oftentimes those projects are happening, those new collaborations are happening in countries other than their own. But that's just one example of what we're doing in this space. I will maybe give one or two more for the sake of time, and then we can turn things over to questions. But just to demonstrate the breadth of opportunity here, my colleagues in the State Department's Bureau of Energy Resources developed a program called the Female Leaders in Energy Program, which is a project active in East Asia and Pacific countries to provide mentorship and networks and trainings for women seeking to lead in diversifying energy economies, specifically in these countries where they currently are not well supported. I always like to point to the statistic that it is the year 2023, and the renewable energy sector workers that are women number only 32%. It's a newer sector where gender roles and responsibilities should theoretically be far less entrenched, but here we are. So in this Female Leaders in Energy program, they're pairing up early and mid-career level women in energy sectors in participating countries, which include, for example, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and many others, with more advanced career stage women in energy in the United States for formal mentorship and exchange, and developing workshops and trainings for these women in participating countries as well. And the final program that I'll mention, to give you one more example, is a program called Silvacarbon. And Silvacarbon is an interagency technical cooperation program funded by the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Oceans, Environment, and Science in cooperation with USAID. And it's a program that's existed for several years to help forested countries to learn to better monitor, measure, and report on the carbon stored in their forests and other lands. And there was an immediate recognition through this program that women are severely underrepresented in this particular field and this reporting process. So in 2021, the Silvacarbon Women in Forest Carbon Initiative was started to really work to provide, once again, the training and the mentorship and other resources necessary to advance women in these spaces. So I hope this provides even more tangible examples of how governments can play a role in this very important space. And I very much look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The floor is yours. Who would like to be the first for comments, questions?
We don't bite.
Maybe the colleagues from the first panel, a reaction on any of the contributions?
Well, thank you so much, and I'm really grateful to hear about all these amazing initiatives, which are very helpful, and I'm really impressed. In the morning we talked a lot about culture, but we didn't maybe mention so much that there are two sides of culture, and on the one hand it's academic culture, so what can we do within the scientific environment, and on the other hand is of course general culture, the society. And I was so grateful to Nayat for mentioning the problems. I just want to say, don't overestimate the differences between a Muslim society and some circles, for example, in 20th century Germany, where maybe, of course, there is a huge difference, but don't overestimate the differences and the kind of resistance you meet with when, as a woman, you want to work and really be active. And I'm wondering, how can we best address this other side, you know, the society, the attitudes in society that are still, I mean, it's changing, but how can we address the resistance we meet with in bigger family contexts and so on? Thank you.
I'm happy to take a quick stab at this and then pass it to my colleagues. We struggle, it's an enormous challenge all the time as the State Department, working in many countries around the world, how to advance the values that and the rights that we think are so critical while respecting different cultural contexts and norms and societal values. We find it very important to partner with and to identify and then partner with trusted community leaders who see our perspective, and then they can become the voices of that cultural shift and change in their communities. Whether that cultural or the community leader is a religious leader or elders in a community, or a teacher, a school teacher, it really depends on the context. We find that to be very important. And I think this is a great place to tie in the wonderful question from the first panel earlier today about engaging men and boys as well, because this is absolutely critical for both a short-term and long-term perspective. Finding allies in leadership positions in the different institutions in which we operate, because those leadership positions, as we know, are currently and often held by men. And if we want change quickly, those allies need to be established so that we can start changing those norms, whatever those institutional settings may be. So allyship in communities and institutions and trusted partners would be my best practices.
Yeah.
If I would jump on this one about the bringing along men and boys. It's also, I think, quite important for us to remember, I mean, we're a room that's predominantly women right now, but it's really important to remember that women leaders and women in different positions are role models for young boys and also young men. And it's important to make sure that we are exposing young boys and men to women leaders, and to say that, so that they have this experience that the first time they have a boss who is, or a supervisor who's a woman, it's not a huge culture shock for them. And so that's quite important for men and boys to have. And it's very important for young children to be exposed to literature and material that shows women doing jobs that maybe men have traditionally done. I know this seems like a no-brainer, and we're in 2023 now, but as someone who has been actively reading a lot of children's books, I will say that they are not very good still.
Yeah, I agree.
And there are not a lot of women doing roles that men have traditionally done, and that it's very hard to, especially as I work in agriculture too, and a lot of books that are focused on agriculture are of what we imagine North American farmers looking like, which is not the predominant food growers around the world, and the agricultural systems don't look like this. So it's a bigger issue of trying to make the literature that children see and young adults see reflecting the real world and what it would look like. And so I think that that's also quite important. And to maybe make the case for institutions that it makes economic sense, right? It makes economic sense to make an institution better for women, because when you make it better for women, it's also better for men. When it's better for families, it's better for both men and women, and that they can relieve some of this burden that women, as you can see, women are having to carry to make an institution better. If they just make the institution better, then we don't have to worry about it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what has been said, because each and everyone is responsible, from the school, the teacher, the religious, the community leaders, everybody. But you know, one thing that it strikes me always is that women themselves, they should also change that. They can stand and do things and just say, no, this is, I'm going to move, I'm going to work in an international organization, I'm taking my family, I can do it, and to have this confidence in herself. And this is in societies, it's, you know, I was at the university, I worked as a university professor for a couple of years, and I was in a department of biology. At that university, the salary comes being university teacher and researcher. So you do teaching, you do research, you don't do it, you are paid the same. And then, you know, most of the women in that department, because they were married, have kids, they don't do research mostly. And they are wondering why the few women that they are doing research, why they are doing that. They should go and take care of the family. Because this is the mentality, is the man who is the breadwinner. And this is what it's personal satisfaction that should grow, that you are not, it's not only the woman who is the family caretaker, it's men and women. And this has to be built at school, children, young girls and young boys, the mother, the father. It's a long way, but I think we should build that in the societies.
Thank you. One more over here.
Yes, to some extent, following what you said now. In Austria, we have for a long time the discussion if the parental leave or part of the parental leave has to be mandatory for the male population. Sweden and the Scandinavian countries are always, let's say, giving us the perspective in social policy. And one of the co-organizers is the ambassador of Sweden. Is there anyone here? What happened in the Scandinavian countries? Is there a mandatory parental leave for the husband?
I don't know exactly when it started, but for a while now, there's a mandatory part each parent has to take. So you have to split this. There is no option.
That's important.
And I don't know the amount of days because I have lived in Sweden, but we have another Swede here.
My name is Lena Höglund Isaksson. I'm a senior research scholar in IASA, actually, since 20 years. So I've been in Austria for 20 years, but I came here and I had small children in Sweden 20 years ago. And already then, per child, we got 450 days per child. And if I remember then correctly, it was 3 months back then was reserved for the male, for the father. So, and this is 20 years ago. And I believe it might be even more today. Yeah, I think it might be even 6 months that is mandatory for the father.
The results.
Yeah, I think already back then, 20 years ago, I think all men in the academic institute where I was in, they would take this leave, at least 6 months. And many would take more of these 450 days. But I think there is also a difference depending on what type of professions. It was very typical that in the higher educated levels that it was more accepted from the employer to take long leave for the fathers. But I think there is still a lot of struggle in the more practical professions for acceptance for long leave also for fathers. So I think there is still a lot of work to do also in Sweden, even if it's been for so long. Thanks.
Thank you. I have 3 more requests to take the floor. I think we do all 3 of them and then come back to the panel. I know we are running a little over time, but I think we can take at least 5 more minutes to do so. Actually, the mic is here, so you start, and then Professor Mondorsi and one back there.
So I have a good colleague of mine about the same age, and she had her kids in Sweden. And, and she was kind of saying, one of the challenges is that we always put all women in one basket, one solution have to fit every woman. And in her case, for example, she also took this one, she also had this 1 year maternity leave, which is in principle sounds really great. But during this 1 year, she also had to take her first kid out of the daycare, because she was supposed to be at home, right? But she actually wouldn't have mind to just work as much she could work during this 1 year. So, but she was forbidden. And, to take a whole year maternity leave from research, is pretty tough, as we heard, right? And, in principle, you can still do certain things, but I think we should also leave options, as a professor, you're sitting on a dream job, right? For us, working a lot is not something we consider a burden. I mean, we love our work. It's a hobby. It's everything, It's how we identify ourselves. And so I think we also have to be careful a little bit to put always all women in one solution. We should have options with different solutions.
Absolutely.
And I always encouraged all my students to just stay, to take a core thing where, absolutely stay away. That is not, in Switzerland, we only have 4 months maternity leave anyway. It's just take your time, enjoy, no pressure whatsoever. We looked at it, keeps going. And after all, we got the additional PhD student, right? So, but then afterwards, I think most of them wanted to come back. So we should actually encourage the women to stay engaged, even if it's only 20% at the beginning. All you can do, more flexibility in the solution of keeping them engaged, depending on what kind of job position they are.
If I may quickly, I think that point about one-size-fits-all solutions being ineffective, it's across the board. We see in this parental leave context, but also I think in any efforts to advance gender equity and equality, it's very important to keep an intersectional perspective, which is why, Amanda, thank you so much for bringing that up before, recognizing that indigenous status, disability status, LGBTQI+ status, racial or ethnic minority identities, poverty status, rural location, urban location. There are so many factors here that contribute to the way women and girls experience these various challenges. And we cannot forget that, even if it's hard to develop specific programs that address these different intersecting forms of identity. If we want our efforts to be effective, it's worth taking the hard route.
Thank you. Two more.
Yes, thank you. I was elaborating on mentorship and the sort of individual action on women to change. And I was wondering if any of you has encountered similar action toward men in leadership. I mean, changing the attitude for men in leadership towards a more shared, open, and shared and open attitude in leadership, and doing individual programs for men on that topic. So changing the attitude from here I am to here society is, here diversity is, here we are, let's say. I don't know if there are programs like that. So.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe we take one more and then we come to the final round on the panel.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for really putting together this very, very rich conversation. I'm very, very privileged to be here this morning. My name is Cecilia Ugaz. I'm the director of the Gender Office at UNIDO. And I really think that, what Professor Montorsi said, something that was very, very appealing for me. Why is it that I wasn't a feminist when I was much younger, right? I really keep on repeating that myself, and I'm an economist by training, completely gender blind for many, many years. And now I come really at I would say, the last stages in my career at the UN, and I'm the director of the Gender Office, right? One of the questions I have for, I think, all the panelists this morning is this issue of gender and the relation with power. Because I myself, I have experience in a long career at the UN, lots of difficulties grappling with that. I mean, I really think we need to do something in terms of leadership education for women, for girls. What is it that we need to be teaching girls in order to be able to assume later in their life such a responsibility? I mean, I think we are, for me at least, living a kind of relatively sad period. We saw the Prime Minister of New Zealand stepping down. We saw the Prime Minister of Scotland stepping down. What is going on with women leadership? That there is something there that honestly I cannot grasp, and I really think this place with such talented and experienced women around could help us brainstorm about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who would like to start?
Maybe I jump in. If I can just address this last point. I think this is a really good point of what are we teaching girls? And I think for me, personally, I mean, I am no longer a girl. I'm not very young anymore. But I have learned so much from watching how the climate activists and the climate activist movement has changed the way we talk about climate change. And I think it's saying, which is something that I've shifted to the way I see the gender activism work, is that we have been trying to change women and girls to fit in a world that was not designed by us, and it was not designed for us to succeed necessarily. And so rather than saying, let's change ourselves, we absolutely need to take down the way that the structure of the society was working. And I see that a lot in the climate activism, that we can't continue the capitalist way that we have been moving, that we need to start changing the system itself. And so I think that we need to teach girls that if the system isn't working for you, that the system doesn't have to continue, and that the system can change, and then you have to find your allies, of course, to take down that system. But it shouldn't be necessarily that you have to change who you are as a person, at least in my view. And in terms of programs for men, I think that this is a really good point, because this is how you build your allies. But from what in the early stages of developing this work, I noticed that sometimes it's the people who are the most connected to science that are not willing to accept the evidence that you bring to them. And so sometimes you need to have evidence from several different sources, and you need to say that this is what is reality. Because there was this view at one point that women weren't as productive in publishing as men were, and when you come with the actual numbers, sometimes they don't accept that. So I would be curious if there are these programs for men. Thanks.
It's an interesting question about what happened to women leadership, what you are asking. And I don't have the answer, but it's a good question, and we should think about it. Maybe the pressure, because when you have, I'm just thinking in my department, when you have these women arriving as the managerial role and responsibility role, in an international organization, it's too much pressure, and there is no support. The environmental support and the family support is too heavy, and I think they are not prepared to the pressure that they are going to face. We need to build this confidence and really support them, in my view, but maybe still we need to, that's a good question. Definitely the flexibility, time flexibility, I fully agree with that. And there's some, and we need to have, this is related to the second question, is to have either the mother or the father be at home to take care of the kids, should be both of them taking this responsibility, but not always the women who should be doing that, which is not fair.
And I'll just say that in terms of what we could be teaching women and girls in this space, this is in my personal opinion and based on observation and experience, I think that we do not do a good enough job empowering women and girls to tell their own stories, and we do not typically train them how to do so. Storytelling, speaking about cultural change, storytelling in various mediums, whether it be the written word, film and television, or even on social media, is an incredible opportunity to help shape perspectives and narratives. And having women and girls tell their own stories of their challenges, their resilience, and their solutions, their stories of overcoming can be incredibly impactful, but not something that we typically do, certainly not in the sciences, right? So that I think would be helpful. And I think it would also help to develop these male allies as well. Perhaps sometimes it's the qualitative evidence and not just the quantitative that can be most moving and effective in changing these perspectives. I will say also that in terms of our foreign assistance programming out of my office, there is typically a requirement, if not a very, very strong suggestion, that applicants to our foreign assistance programming to actually be our implementing partners must include components of how they're going to engage men and boys on the ground regarding whatever topic we're talking about, whether it's women in STEM or climate change or preventing and responding to gender-based violence, something we've talked about quite a bit today. So yeah, I tried to tackle a little bit of both questions there. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. And as all the other two panelists already took the floor, so Dr. Jenkins, you also get the floor.
Thank you. In response to your question about women in leadership positions and being set up to fail, I wonder if the panel, being much younger than me, would comment on social media, right? Because I think a lot of the pressure comes through those routes, and I don't know if we get the adequate training that we need. So I'd love to hear from you.
The answer is probably you're completely right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But maybe, Aubrey.
As the token millennial. Absolutely. I think social media holds great challenge and opportunity. And it's balancing the challenges and the opportunities there. That is something that I think we're all still figuring out. There are new pressures on that social media introduces. There are old pressures that are exacerbated that can be seen as antiquated. However, my goodness, the number of Instagram accounts alone that I'm aware of that are promoting women in STEM and telling the stories of women in STEM or women climate activists or young people who are trying to tell their stories of resilience. It's really inspiring. And I think, and again, in my personal opinion, that we could do a much better job of using that tool strategically to empower women and girls, and hopefully motivate some perspective change in men and boys as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for pointing out the positive. A 16-year-old Australian girl just skied to the South Pole and served a ham sandwich up to her detractors on social media.
I love that. Yeah. I think if I can speak about social media as also a millennial who was very reticent to get on social media, but I did, and I I have to admit, for me, it was finding a community where I didn't know there was one. And it was being able to plug into these communities of women connected to science and also other kinds of activism, so not just necessarily climate activists, but like disability activists, indigenous community activists, and understanding that a lot of the challenges we are facing are similar, and being able to have language to describe those challenges, having language to describe, or to actually talk about what we can do, was something that I had not been able to experience because I didn't have that community. You only have your small community of what you can communicate with in real life. And so, I mean, of course, Twitter, for example, has been changing over the last year, which is, or not so great, and this is, I think, maybe not for the better, but I think being able to have these different people that you could look to and understand was really, really beneficial. And for example, we hosted different social media trainings so that you could actually learn how to set up an account, how to deal with these bullying and trolling situations, how to actually talk about your research in a way that is engaging to the public, not just to other scientists. And that was really fantastic because it was a way that made us feel comfortable with a platform that maybe scientists aren't raised to understand or trained to understand.
Thank you. Would you like to comment as well?
No, I just say you're absolutely right.
Well, thank you. As we already 15 minutes over the scheduled time, we're already having the lunch break now, by the way. But I think it was important to continue. First of all, let me thank my panelists, but also the organizers for having this event. And as there are several partners in the event, maybe for a next meeting, it might be an idea to actually focus on how to engage men and see examples, because usually, at least in Austria, it works best if a man tells other men their story, then they believe that they could do it as well. And just talking about role models, staying at home, and many, maybe not scientists, but at least in public service, the young generation, it's completely normal for them, the men, that they stay at home as well. So they really share the parental leave time and have wonderful stories to tell as well. So maybe we find some of them in leadership and colleagues, and that might help for such an event, and we might have a mixed audience then and make it to their problem.
Very good.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you all.